Now that Ole Miss is winning big time and competing for the college football playoff, their recruiting has gone more national and more big time players. What's next for the Rebels in recruiting?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making the Portal your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's talk about Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, their ability to recruit nationally, build their roster more through the high school ranks. How are they doing it and where they're doing it from? To help me figure all of that out, Steven Willis, there he is, from Locked On Rebels, Locked On Ole Miss. I don't think anybody thought that Lane was going to do this much for this long in Oxford, outside of the people maybe there. But he's exceeded my expectations, and I just kind of want yours from a high school recruiting perspective, Steven.
You know, we've never seen what Lane Kiffin can do for this because he's never been anywhere this long. You know, him gradually moving everything over. You have a situation when he got to Ole Miss, they were heavy on the transfer portal, and that's still a multi-dominant issue inside the program. But slowly, they have used the success that they've had to start going into the high school ranks. And I was on my show talking about, listen, the kids that are in this next high school class, they don't really know anything other than Ole Miss being a 10-win type program in college football. So that helps Lane Kiffin. That makes the recruiting a little bit easier. And all Ole Miss needs is high school recruits to take off out of high school to hit the next level in recruiting, because we saw Lane Kiffin when he was at Tennessee, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. That was a long time. But he had Ed Orgeron on his staff, and in a very short window, they were able to put together a top 10 class. So Lane Kiffin can go after high school recruiting whenever it's available to him. And right now, with the Ole Miss success in their program and everything that is happening, they have a chance to next level this recruiting a little bit.
I think that you're going to see Ole Miss compete for top 10 classes moving forward, because unless something surprising happens, I don't think he's going anywhere. And there's always a chance of an NFL job or something. That I'm sure that intrigues him. He's intrigued with the NFL, but those are really impossible to predict. So I'm leaving that out for anybody who wants to throw. That's their business. College, I don't think there's going to be a lot of jobs open up that he'd have an interest in. Like, would he be interested in Georgia? Sure. Is Kirby going anywhere? No. You know what I mean? Like, there's only maybe 5 jobs he might have an interest in. I don't think they're going to be open. Texas, it's not going to be open. You know what I mean? Like, where is he going? And he's doing well there. I think that's one of the reasons the high school recruiting's picked up, because it takes longer. High school recruiting is a year-plus process for every kid now, sometimes 2+ years. And they're being successful with those guys. If you're an Ole Miss fan and you take nothing else from this pod, Kiffin has put in the time, or they would not be getting one of the kids you and I talked about right before this show started. Like, did we really think they were going to get Devin Harper out of Calvary Baptist in Shreveport? That is an LSU stronghold. Flipping an LSU kid from in-state is arguably the most difficult thing to do in high school recruiting. That state is loyal, brother. I've lived down there. That is a different deal. Everything is purple and gold. They'll paint a baby purple and gold. It's ridiculous. So for him to get that kid is another example of that. Do you get the sense that Lane and the people around him, for that matter, are dialed in to being in Oxford for the long haul? And that's one of the reasons that they're so successful on the recruiting trail.
I think so. Like, everybody, and all this noise about Lane Kiffin to Florida happened last year, and Ole Miss fans were like, I don't think he's going to Florida. I don't think he's actually interested in that job. I think there's one job that Ole Miss fans should sweat about if it's not Texas, where these super money schools are, and that's Miami.
I agree.
If Miami happened, that would be a different deal. But as it sits now, the Venn diagram of places that would hire a coach and the places that Lane Kiffin would go, it's not very big. And because of that, they're like, hey, let's refocus on high school recruiting. And it also helps that Mississippi is getting really good at high school football right now. There's more prospects in Mississippi now than there have been in the last 10, 15 years. And because of those two events coming together, Lane Kiffin has a chance to make some hay a little bit at Ole Miss in a way that other coaches that have been there, they haven't been able to do. And it wasn't even possible for them to do it.
Which coaches do you think do the best job from an assistant standpoint for the Rebels, and how many of them are good outside the state of Mississippi?
Randall Joyner, obviously, he's a Texas guy, went to SMU. You always hear his name mentioned whenever a kid pops up around the Metroplex, but he's also one of the top defensive line coaches in the entire country. Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator, you just get the sense that even as a coordinator, this dude just likes recruiting. He just enjoys that process. It might not be true, but it certainly comes across that way. Those are probably the two dominant ones, but this staff, top to bottom, they're just building recruiters all over it, from Wes Neighbors, Charlie Weiss Jr., the whole 9 yards. But the top two is probably Randall Joyner and Pete Golding.
Well, they're doing a good job on both sides of the ball, because I was going through the class, looking at the 25 group, a couple good O linemen, a couple good D linemen, receiver, Dylan Alford, different guys that have a tie to the state, or they took a visit early, whatever. Again, it's relationships. They got most of these kids on the campus early, and the Grove is an easy place to sell. I understand that, but they had to put in the time to do it. Mm-hmm. So my next question for you on this topic, what can Ole Miss do to get over the top and be somebody that competes for that top 5 to top 8 class? Like that's a really hard group to break into. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about the same 8 schools every year that finish at the top.
Yeah, I think that you're at the point where Ole Miss needs a trophy. That's where they are. They need something in the trophy case outside of a Gator Bowl trophy. They need to go to Atlanta. They need to make the playoffs. That is probably the next step for Ole Miss as a program. And also, you need a high school kid to show out at the college level other than Suntarine Perkins, who's an absolute beast. He's an SEC Player of the Year candidate next season. But I do think that other coaches around the SEC and in college football, they negative recruit against Ole Miss because of the transfer portal. Don't go to Ole Miss, the transfer portal, they're going to do that. And I do think that high school kids need to play a little bit more regularly. Now, there's been some elite dudes that have played. Quinshon Judkins, Suntarine Perkins, those guys have gotten on the field. But I'd like to see, like Devin Harper, we just talked about him, make it onto the rotation to where he's getting the ball game. Maybe 2 or 3 kids, Keon Young, perhaps from Lakeland, somebody getting on the field that just isn't the slam dunk 5-star other than Caleb Cunningham. And I think that would help them as well.
Yeah, if you get somebody that really starts making the rounds as a lead-in on sports shows and, quite honestly, on shows like this, kids will notice. They'll see the YouTube shorts. They'll see the Instagram reels. Those things matter, and that helps your program as much, if not more than anything else, podcasts, etc. They need somebody to kind of go viral, and they're right on that fringe. So speaking of a key player, there's an in-state kid that I know that was recently a commitment to LSU but has backed off of that. We're going to talk about him next here on The Portal. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to get in on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action, and if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Here's an example. You can use the live betting feature because it helps keep every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're trying to back your team for a late game rally or a player to hit a clutch 3, it doesn't matter because, like anything else, don't miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Tupelo, Mississippi is probably known more for Elvis Presley, but JaReylan McCoy is from there as well. Amongst many players that have come out of that high school in that area, it's just, for me, it's a typical small to mid-sized town in Mississippi that it just always seems to have like a player every couple of years. You're like, yep, Ole Miss, LSU, Arkansas, everybody's going to be stopping by there in the spring. Well, Oregon and everybody else in the country too, Miami, you name it, they've all offered JaReylan 6'6", 250. I saw him recently at the Under Armour camps. He was there, and I know that you were there too. Like, he looks the part, and he has since he was a sophomore in high school. How important is it, in your opinion, Steven, for the Rebs to consistently keep not just players at home, but defensive linemen? Because like last year, they spent $1 bazillion on the portal to get a certain defensive lineman from A&M. I'm sure that was a hefty price tag. But he was
originally from Olive Branch.
Yeah, I know. That's what's ironic. But it's better to get him out of high school, in my opinion. You develop in your system, you get more publicity out of it, and it helps develop your culture. Getting a guy like McCoy, I'd have to think is pretty important. And for what it's worth, 24/7 Sports, by the way, has him predicted for Ole Miss now that he's no longer a commitment to the Bayou Bengals. What say you? How important is it for the Rebels to keep D linemen like this inside the state?
First of all, when we were down in Under Armour, by the way, I hardly talked to JaReylan McCoy because it was just known that he was likely going to commit to LSU at that game. So I didn't really necessarily pay attention too much to what was going on with him. I guess I learned a lesson with that because a couple of weeks later, he flipped his, he decommitted from LSU, and now you're getting crystal balls or RPMs or whatever that to Ole Miss. Listen, I think McCoy has a chance to grow into a 3 technique and be a pretty dominant 3 technique. He's the guy that has 6'6", 290 written all over him with the way that he is built. And he is somebody that by the time he is a junior in college is going to be an absolute monster. Similar, think Robert Kimdichie, because Kimdichie was a defensive end that committed to Ole Miss, just coincidentally, but he was 240, 250 pounds going through the high school recruitment. But by the time he got to Ole Miss, he was 6'4", 6'5", 285 pounds of just twisted steel. I think a similar track could be for JaReylan McCoy. Listen, I like the idea of a kid from Tupelo committing to Ole Miss because if you are a college football fan, you realize that most kids from Tupelo, they go south. They go to Starkville. It wasn't until very recently that a kid from Tupelo ended up at Ole Miss. I think it was a Shamar Darden 2 years ago. This last year, it was Mason Dunn. And this year, potentially, could be JaReylan McCoy. So getting some inroads into that could become for Ole Miss what Batesville used to be. South Panola is not what it was. That was the pipeline before. There was always 1 or 2 kids from South Panola that ended up at Ole Miss. Maybe Tupelo could become that school. And also, by the way, if you're looking at Tupelo athletes, they got a running back that's pretty good this year too.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. Like I said, it's kind of random how it works, but Tupelo's always got somebody. I'm looking at an article from Auburn Live on On3. He's going to visit Ole Miss, Florida, A&M, LSU. I mean, this is a typical SEC battle, and those schools shouldn't shock anybody. A&M recruits Mississippi. Florida's always recruited there, and of course, LSU. So Auburn's the other one. This is going to be a battle, but I have a feeling that just knowing him, he'll take his time with it now that he's kind of thought about it and looked at it. He'll take his visits. He'll probably make a decision later this summer, but you can't teach the length, whether he plays strong side, 3 tech, both. Having an interior defensive lineman on third downs at the very least that is 6'6" is annoying for quarterback. And I know JayReylan pretty well. He is as long as a magnolia tree. Like he's just not a little guy to get around. His length is ridiculous. He's built like a basketball player. That's another way to put it. So if you could get him, maybe one of the other kids, like the kid from Hattiesburg or something, you'd be well on your way to being done and being in state with your recruiting. I know there are numerous other players they want in state, in particular 2 receivers, but Ole Miss has to consistently do better on defense, in my opinion, to consistently get to that next level. I ain't worried about Lane recruiting on the offensive side of the ball because even if he needs to go get one guy from the portal, he will figure it out. He's so good at evaluating players and putting in a fit, even if it's a one-year wonder. That side of the ball will take it. Let me ask you this. JaReylan's obviously a really good D lineman. Is there a kid in state defensively besides him that doesn't play D line, like a linebacker or DB they got to get, in your opinion, Steven?
I forgot his name. I'm having a little bit of a brain tumor moment, but is the kid out of Hartsville and Jackson, the safety.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's he's really good.
He's really good. But also, if you pay attention to the drama, apparently his sister was at Ole Miss and she transferred out of Ole Miss, and there might have been some hard feelings that happened there. And Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is trying to overcome that as we speak. Let me get your opinion on something. Back in the days when I worked at Rivals, in another lifetime, we had a theory, and it was like this. If you were the head coach of a college program, you get your quarterbacks from California or Texas. You get your offensive linemen from Texas. You get your skill players from Florida, and you get your defensive linemen from Mississippi.
I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I'll take D linemen from Georgia, Alabama, or Mississippi. Those states, somewhere in Louisiana too. Louisiana D linemen are awesome. JaReylan Womack is who you were talking about, by the way. But I mean, if you can just consistently get, let's say, 3 out of the top 5 players in the state a year, you're in good shape. Especially if you're Ole Miss with Kiffin, if you can get 3 out of the top 5 defensive kids in state each year, because again, he's going to recruit offense a lot easier. He's a play caller, he's a quarterback coach. That'll take care of itself. Defense, you win more with recruiting. Offense, it's a combination. You got to have good coaching. You need talent too, but you can win and mirror things with offense and play calling. Defense by talent. So I think kids like JaReylan Womack, and I know the story you're talking about, there is truth to that room, right? I know the kid personally, but I don't know I haven't talked to him in a long time. Preston Ashley, kid from Brandon, somebody I just saw at Under Armour. He can fly.
He's a legacy,
kid
by the way.
Out of Brandon. Not shocking. You got JayReylan, that's a really good player. Tylen Wilson out of Pascagoula. They got a shot at him. They're battling Alabama and a bunch of other schools. I've seen him play live. He's legit. If you can get some of these kind of kids, TJ White, Jackson Academy, if Ole Miss gets these kind of defensive players in state, plus it's probably easier from a recruiting perspective. It's just distance. Everything's within 5 hours. They're going to be in a really good spot. If they ended up in the top 10 this year, it would not shock me. But I also agree with your earlier point to get there. They need something in the trophy case, meaning at the end of this cycle, we get to November 15th, and its signing day will be the first Wednesday in December. If they're in the conversation for the playoff again, if they're sitting 9-1 going in the final 2 games or something like that, they will have more chances to flip kids, keep kids home, and if they've got anything going on with like a last home visit for a kid or something, they're going to win more of those. You brought up that is a very poignant perspective. You got to get to the point with the elite kids. They want to see it. They don't want to hear about it. They want to see you do it. Ole Miss is on that teeter-tottering point, and it's the only thing left. And there's nothing Lane can do until the season. The only thing you can do is talk about it right now. But they also have one other thing, especially with the in-state kids, or maybe like a Memphis kid. That's the other city. They got to win in Memphis when they want kids. It hasn't been quite as good here recently, but that's still a good city for football. Get the kids down in March, early April for spring ball, for any junior days. They got to make sure they get those kids on campus that live within 2.5 hours as often as possible. Those especially. A coast kid I get at Ocean Springs, Pascagoula, those are harder because it's a lot further. It's 4 hours or something like that.
Six. It's 6.
It's a pain in the butt is what it is. So there's no way around that. But if you can get them on campus now, it makes it a lot easier to get, well, maybe at least a top 15 class every year. And again, I think they got a shot at a top 10. And that's what we're going to talk about next here on The Portal. What would it mean to Ole Miss fans, Steven, to sign like the number 6 class in the country, to solidify? What would it do for the morale of the Rebels?
Well, in 2013, the Kim Dichie and the Treadwell and the Tunsil class, I think they got up in that range, and they did in 2016. That was the A.J. Brown class. So this is territory that they have been in before, and I think it's a little bit different now. than it was. Back in 2016 was back when National Signing Day was still a thing. I remember when the Robert Kimdichie class was signed in 2013, I was embedded with James Franklin with Pat Forty at Vanderbilt on that signing day. So I got to see another SEC's perspective of Ole Miss making those waves. It's a little bit different now because let's say Ole Miss finishes 7th in high school recruiting. They're still going to go out and try and oversign them in the transfer portal. If you throw up a number 5 or number 6 in the transfer portal, it doesn't matter if you're 6th in high school recruiting. If you throw up a 7 in the transfer portal, everybody's going to say what's wrong. I think that Ole Miss fans have started to look at this as a total like roster building enterprise through the transfer portal and high school recruiting. And the high school recruiting is like the first half. And then you see exactly what you get. Now, they would be excited. Don't get me wrong. They would be absolutely over the moon if they landed Tristan Keys and a bunch of his friends and landed Ryder Lions or something like that and got up to the top of the standings because of the momentum that would be built for the transfer portal window. But what would be important about getting that number 7 class in high school is the momentum that they can take into the transfer portal where everybody can see, okay, everybody will be talking about Ole Miss being a top 10 level recruiter. And then all of a sudden you're going in the transfer portal to plug those holes that you're looking to plug. I think the totality of the roster build is more important, but Ole Miss fans would be terribly excited if they had the number 6 or number 7 recruiting class.
I think that's the case as well. There's something to that, being able to puff your chest out a little bit. Hey, we're doing it on both ends now. We've been really good at the portal. We love that. But if you can get the high school kids too and develop, then you don't have to use the portal as much. Kind of my point from earlier. I don't know if they'll be able to get to that point every year because with the kids changing rosters, sometimes you got to use the portal even if you don't want to. And that's just the way it is. And there'll be a guy that you don't expect has a great year, then he turns pro a year early. There are odd circumstances. Kid gets hurt, whatever. Even like going out and getting a long snapper or kicker, sometimes somebody wants an experienced guy that used the portal. So it's a variation. Steven, I'll ask you this last question here on the Rebels. They have moved up the chain in the SEC considerably. What do you think it is that gets them into that upper echelon long term, even beyond Kiffin being there? Let's say Lane's there another 5 years. I'm just throwing a random number. What makes Ole Miss cool long term to keep them in the top 10 conversation? Is it winning it? Do they got to win the national title? Do they at least got to get to the Final Four? What is it that kind of makes them cool and Ole Miss kind of sticks around for the long term?
Yeah, I've thought about that because in baseball they won a national championship, and everybody, said that. In women's golf they won a national championship, and basketball, men's and women's, they're probably going to the tournament this year. What would make Ole Miss football the cool hip thing, other than the fact that Lane Kiffin's your coach? For whatever reason, Lane Kiffin is just a hip guy for the fans, and he's going to be a star on social media. But what would Ole Miss need to do to elevate themselves almost above that? And I think Ole Miss needs to win a playoff game. I think that's what it is. I think if Ole Miss gets, even if it's a 16-team playoff, get that first round game and advance, I think Ole Miss at that point can really puff their chest out, like you said, and they can build on that. Other programs, if Georgia gets there, the only thing that left for them to do is win the whole thing. I think Ole Miss still has the benefit of the doubt of being in a position to where if you win that game, if you win that would be the biggest game in the program's history, you can live off of that for a little bit.
Well, I think that's a big point. It really is. But if they could win, like if they won 2 playoff games this year, that would change your direction dramatically. People will see you differently. Penn State couldn't win the big game, couldn't win the big game.
It would be Clemson.
Playoff, they didn't play anybody, but they won 2 games. They could still say that. No offense, but Boise and BYU and SMU just weren't on the same talent level. But they kicked the crap out of them. It changed their perception of Penn State quite a bit. They're already been talked about top 5 for this year, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it can even happen to a tradition-rich program like that. So I think that's a big selling point for Ole Miss if they can get that done this year, and they could. you and I both agree Lefty is going to have a big year behind center for Kiffin. He's a great kid, by the way. I know him, root for him. I still think he should have went baseball and just taken the money, but that's another story. But he's got a cannon, but just a great kid, and he can read a defense, man. He will be a manipulator that throws the ball around the lot, and it's just a pain in the butt because he can run too. So Kiffin will turn him loose and let him go. I would not be surprised if he threw for over 3,000 yards. And Ole Miss will be one of the more exciting teams this year. Steven, tell everybody where they can find your work, brother.
You can find me at Locked On Ole Miss on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me at the Steven Willis. I'm on there quite frequently. Basically, we have a good time talking about Ole Miss sports, and we do a show about perspectives about what's going on in Ole Miss football. We're kind of the voice of the forgotten fan. So hope to see you, comment on the thing, and we will have a good time, and you're invited.
Thank you much, sir. You can find this podcast, The Portal, Locked On, The Portal, for YouTube, for Apple, for Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Again, Locked On, The Portal. I will see you again soon. Like and subscribe.